All right, our next project can be seen in PhotoBucket with the past student work. It is another way of approaching basic shapes with just color simplifications and vector shapes within Photoshop. So last time we were dealing with raster line work and overlapping layers. This time we're going to be building vector shapes. And you want to pick something that you like, a two-dimensional image, save it to your desktop, and then open it with Photoshop. So this is from the new Netflix movie, their adaptation of The Little Prince. This is a film still from it. It has a really nice, strong graphic quality. And you can tell that just from squinting at the image. You'll see how it breaks up into very, very clear, distinct shapes, kind of cutouts of shapes. And when you think of vectors, I want you to think of cut paper, different shapes layered on top of each other. When you think of raster, I want you to think of pixels, right? So the idea with vectors is we're not going to deal with pixels at all. And so it doesn't matter if your reference image, like this one, is low resolution and very pixelated. We're going to be refining it with really clean shapes. But we are doing that within a raster program, which is Photoshop. So in order to get the shapes to look clean, the first thing I need to do is go up to image and image size. And I'm going to make this into a good resolution image. And a good resolution image should print on an 8x10 piece of paper. So I'm going to change its width. I have resample checked and I have the proportions locked here. So I'm going to change the width to 10 inches, which is as big as can fit on an 8x10 piece of paper. And then the resolution I'm going to set to 350, which is our lab standard. Now that increased the memory from being less than 1 megabyte to being almost 20 megabytes. And you'll see it really softens all the pixels. But we're going to replace all of that image with our own. But now it will render our shapes in a nice, smooth way. Okay, so how do we start this project? Well, you are going to use the shape tools within Photoshop, which are near the very bottom. This rectangle, this is the first shape tool. And this is the most basic way to do it. We are not actually going to use the pen tool. Instead, we will customize all of our vector shapes from these options. Keep it really simple. So, just like when we were doing basic shapes of characters, I might squint and see, well, what is the biggest foreground shape? I'm going to do the background a little later. What's the biggest foreground shape that's easy? Well, I can see a circle for the head. I can see kind of a rectangle and an oval for the body, an oval for the body there. So why don't I start with the circle for the head? And I go to the shape tool and I find the ellipse tool, which is for circles and ovals. And then I'm simply going to drag and drop the shape. Okay. Now it's going to give me my shaped options, shape tools within Photoshop. Anything below this little pen tool, these are all vector tools. So it's a little different than what we've done before. And now I have properties. So the properties will show up. The first property I might want to change is the color. And I could pick one of these given colors from the swatches, which are based on old printing methods. And it's kind of cool that Photoshop now populates the swatches with the old print quality, like newspaper comic swatches. Or I can actually steal the color directly from the image. And I'll show you that a little later. But just pick something for now. Say OK. And then I can use my move tool and move this around. And if I want to change the color, I simply click on it, click on the layer of that shape, and it will bring up, if I double click on it, it'll bring up the color picker, and I can actually choose a color directly from my image. But you see there's lots of different colors, so I want to find something that feels right. And I'm going to change it from being only web colors to being the millions of colors it can see. And I'll pick something nice and in between. Okay, so now I have that. I'm going to place it where I think it should go. And then I can hit Command T. And I can scale it. I can stretch it. I can put it right in its place. then hit return. So that's what I have so far. Next, let's do the rectangle for the body. Drag and drop a rectangle. Double click to choose its color. Then I'm just going to steal it right from the still itself. So I'm happy with it. Then I can use the move tool, and I can use Command T to shrink it, to rotate it, whatever I think it needs. Now I have this. Now how do we get these more complex, more interesting shapes? Well, for this scarf, I'm not going to be able to do that with one shape. So I'm going to use the ellipse tool. I'm going to draw a kind of long and narrow oval. I can double click and choose its color. And now I'm going to use the move tool, use free transform, maybe rotate it a little bit. But now I'm going to right click, and this is really what this will help us learn, which is new. Right click within the transform box and go to warp, which is my favorite transformation. Warp will make a simple 9-grid kind of wireframe of your two-dimensional image, which allows you to push and pull from any one of those anchor points to get much more complex shapes. And it does it in a fairly even and controllable way. And you just have to play around with it. So I'll get the first curve of this scarf by using this warp tool. There we go. And we're not going for perfection here, we're going for a simplification. So just that's one oval that's been warped, and that's what it gives me. To get the edges of the scarf, I might need to use triangles. And you see there's no triangle basic shape here. Instead there's what's called the Polygon Tool. So you select the Polygon Tool, and then you say how many sides you want. And its default is a pentagram. So I'm just going to change it, or pentagon rather, and I'm just going to change it to a 3-sided shape, which for all you math whizzes means it's a triangle. I draw it, and then I free transform it and stretch it to be close to what I want. Notice that overlapping is just fine. And then I can free transform it and warp it, just like I did with the oval. So just like in drawing basic shapes, doing a lot of overlaps is very helpful and is expected. Like so. Now what if I want to do that again, but I don't want to go through the whole process of starting with the solid triangle? Well, since you'll notice that each layer is labeled after the type of shape you made. So I can take my polygon shape and I can just Command J it, duplicate it, and then move it down. And then warp from there, Command T. So warp from a shape you've already created. And that will save you some time. Now notice that when you warp, you can only curve the object in one direction. That's not exactly what I mean. But I couldn't warp one oval to go both down and then also up very easily. So that's why you'll need to overlap shapes. And if something's not perfect, that's just fine. But you'll learn a lot about it by trying to make it as strong as you can. But just trying to get the essence of the composition to come through. Now here's another trick that's helpful. So we're building a lot of layers. I already have as many as I had for the cartoon jumble, and this is all I have so far. So when you're on the Move tool, you have this option in the options window to auto-select by layer. And at times this is very helpful because now I can just click a layer and it will automatically select that layer so I can edit it. So I don't need to know which one it is, I just have to click on it. Now where this becomes a problem is if I have like an overlay layer or a low opacity layer over the top of everything, it will always select that one. But just be aware you have that option under the Move tool. And you just really have to play with the tools to see what their limitations actually are. They are getting better and better within Photoshop. So Andy Warhol has a quote I like, which is, "Art is anything you can get away with." And digital art is basically, how far can you push these tools? So the only problem with overlapping is just making sure that nothing really stands out as a problem with the overlap. And that curves gently work with other curves. And this is basically an introduction to the problems of Illustrator, with which we'll be working later in the class. All these same issues come up over and over again. And it's the difference between professional work and kind of amateurish work. But again, we're not going for perfection. And we're dealing with the biggest, most basic shapes first. So now I might do another oval for his knees. Again, overlapping is just fine. Double click within the window to get the color. And then I can warp them to make them the slightly more top-heavy shapes they are. I can even kind of flatten them out and make fairly complex shapes. And by doing this, I'm figuring out what works. Whoops. Let's do that again. I'm not trying to copy every detail. I'm trying to focus on what is most important to this composition. I'm going to go ahead and click Don't Show Again when I warp a shape, because it takes it out as being a solid shape, and that's fine, as long as it's still what's called a vector layer. And you can tell a vector layer by that little anchored square in the corner of the layer window. Okay, now the issue is this shape, if you think of it as cut paper, is on top of this shape. And I want it to be behind this shape. So I can select that layer and I can drag it underneath. Okay. So it really is like cut paper, even in how you order the paper together. Same thing with maybe an oval for the arms and the shoulders. Yeah, I like that color. I can stretch at the corners, I can scale, and I can rotate. But this project is really about the warp tool and seeing how you can get complex shapes with it that are very satisfying. You might even like your composition better than the one you're referencing.